Hello, everyone. My name is Jennifer West, and I am the host of this podcast, Take Note. I'm also the artistic director of Muse West Concerts. I am a white settler who is located on the traditional and ancestral territories of the Coast Salish peoples of Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish. It is a pleasure today to be hosting a musician who I heard play about 5 years ago at the Vancouver Playhouse with the Galileo tour that Tafel Music did, Lucas Harris. And then I was able to hear Lucas play a concert at home with his wife through the Tafel Music subscription series. And since then, Lucas, I've been a pretty big fan. So welcome to our podcast. I'm going to give a few quick, fun, rapid round questions before we dig into the meat and potatoes of our podcast today. If you had to pick between Monteverdi and Vivaldi, who would you pick?
Monteverdi.
Monteverdi, okay. What about Corelli or Bach?
Bach.
Okay. And last question, guitar or lute?
Well, you'd have to specify what kind of lute and what kind of guitar.
So what you're
I
telling
would
me,
probably need to spend a few hours with each one to make a final decision.
that's right. So what you're telling me is that you better have space for both on your desert island.
I think so.
Wonderful. You have brought your lute, and this is going to be quite a visual podcast today, which I'm really excited about. So, for the people that listen on audio, sorry, there will be some visual stuff that you might miss out on today, but you can watch it on YouTube and Facebook. And before we get started, I just wanted to say that Lucas will be performing with Cree Métis baritone Jonathan Adams on Friday, February 11th. Oh my gosh, that's in 5 days. That's exciting. At 7:30 p.m. at the Bill Reid Art Gallery downtown. We cannot say thank you enough to the Canada Council for the Arts, so we'll say it in French. Merci au Conseil des Arts du Canada pour le soutien pour ce projet. And Lucas, what do you have in your hands? I've got some kids watching this. They've never seen it. What is this?
Okay, so this is a Renaissance lute, and they come in many different sizes and shapes and number of strings. We, instead of talking about the number of strings on a lute, we usually talk about the number of courses because it has this feature of having double. Each course is usually a pair of strings. Very often the top string we call the chanterelle is a single string, and all the others are either unison or octave strings. So you get the fundamental pitch and then one string that's tuned an octave higher. And this particular lute was made by my dear friend in Vancouver, Travis Carey. And did I already say this is a 7-course lute?
That's really cool. So, a lot of the students that might see this podcast later will say, it looks like a funny guitar. Tell us more about, it's bent, the shape is oval. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so it has this round body, which is like one of its main features, and it's made by bending ribs over a mold. And it has this kind of bent back peg box, which looks to some people like it might be broken or something. And we don't know exactly why they built them like that, but they just used that convention for many, many years. It has friction pegs, so pegs that are just kind of go into a hole and you just kind of turn them and tune the pegs like that. There's no gears or anything like that. It has frets that are made of gut that are tied on, and as a result of that, they're actually movable. So I can actually tune notes, in different ways by just kind of moving frets around, which is something that's different from the modern guitar. We talked about the double courses, so the double strings. The strings traditionally were made of sheep gut. And nowadays we sometimes play on sheep gut, but very often we play on some kind of nylon strings. Mostly I play on these strings that are called Nile gut that were invented by an Italian chemist named Mimo Perufo, and it's a type of nylon that's engineered to feel and sound as close to real gut as possible, but they stay in tune better. They're not quite as sensitive to changes in humidity, and they last a bit longer, and they're cheaper as well.
That sounds like a win all the way around.
Yes, yes. I think, I think Mimo should probably get a Nobel Peace Prize or something like that for inventing these wonderful strings. Unfortunately, they don't work for bowed instruments because I don't think, I think the reason for that is because I don't think rosin sticks to any kind of plastic. But for a plucked instrument, they're wonderful.
Okay.
And I should just mention that there are many different kinds of lutes with many different kinds of strings. So you might see a medieval lute with only 5 courses and with some more kind of almost Islamic type decoration on the top and maybe played with a plectrum. Then in the Renaissance, 6-course lutes were common for a long time, and then they added this bass note and we have the 7-course lute. And then very quickly, they started adding more and more bass notes. So then you had the 8-course lute and the 9-course lute, and then you have a 10-course lute like this one. And then you get into the Baroque. At that point, this is kind of a transitional lute, but in the Baroque, you get the 11-course lute in France. And then in Italy, you get things like the Theorbo and the arch lute, which have 14 courses. And then finally, in the time of like J.S. Bach in Central Europe, you get the 13-course lute, which has double strings on everything except for the top 2. So it's a total of 24 strings. And
How do you keep track of all of them? Like literally 24 strings. That's a lot.
Yeah. Well, one of the answers to that is there's a technique of holding your pinky on the soundboard. And sometimes you'll see even like a modern rock and roll guitar player like hold their wrist on the bridge or something like that to give you kind of an anchor point so you kind of know where you are in the instrument. So on the lute they would put the pinky down like this, and sometimes your thumb is also planted on a string, and the distance between your pinky and your thumb gives you a pretty good idea of where you are on the instrument. And of course you can always look down and see where you are, but of course we practice a lot to make sure we don't have to look at our hands the whole time to find the right strings.
That's very, very cool. Since you have, which lute are you bringing to Vancouver? What would be appropriate for playing Dowland?
Right. So normally for Dowland, a 7-course lute like this would be absolutely perfect. That's the lute that Dowland often wrote for. Some of his solo pieces require 8 courses. And then his Lacrimae, the pieces for a viol consort with a lute part require 9-course lute, but usually 7 courses is enough. So this would be normally the lute I'd bring, but in this case, I have this lute, which I call my baritone lute, which it's pitched. Actually, it's a tone lower than this lute. It's actually 3 semitones lower than modern pitch. And I'll just sort of explain the idea of the baritone lute a little bit. Supposedly back in the Renaissance, they didn't transpose songs or the music for singers by semitones on the piano the way we do nowadays. The reason for that is because you can't play in all keys on the lute. Usually we stay within, about three or so sharps or flats. And what they did instead was you would go and buy another lute that was pitched to your voice. And so if you were a mezzo or a baritone, you would buy a bigger lute that was, pitched to a couple of semitones lower than what was kind of the standard pitch. Well, really, there wasn't really anything like a standard pitch back then. But anything I play on this lute, whether it's a lute song in tabulated part or like a Basso Continuo part, immediately gets transposed down 3 semitones. So it means, all the songs from the Renaissance and Baroque are mostly just written for high voice, and it's up to you if you want to transpose them. And with this lute, I don't have to make a new score. I can just read from the score that's for a tenor or a soprano, and it immediately comes out in the right key for a baritone or a mezzo. So this lute turns out to be the like perfectly pitched to Jonathan Adams' voice, and so for that reason, this is the one I'm bringing, and it also has this wonderful kind of low tessitura, which is a nice kind of a nice color to have alongside a dark, rich baritone voice.
Oh, this is really exciting. So, when you're here, I'm hoping to sing some Purcell for you.
Ah, great.
So, if I have the piano score, can you read that for lute, or how does it work?
Yeah, you can read a piano score and a lute. You have to sort of, usually what I'd prefer to have is just a Basso Continuo part, like they were originally published. But usually in a piano score, you can kind of figure out mostly what the continuo part would have looked like. And I know a lot of Purcell songs, so I might even know the one you're going to sing for me.
I attempt from Love Sickness.
Oh yeah, I know it very well.
Okay. Wonderful. So I know we have a young audience watching today. Do you have like 45 seconds of something anonymous from the Italian Renaissance? Or it doesn't have to be anonymous, but anything from the Italian Renaissance you could play for us?
Ah, I probably have something. Let me just see here.
We're putting Lucas on the spot, unfortunately.
Give me a second. I have it's so wonderful. I'm playing so often music from a tablet now, and I have you know like probably half of the lute solo repertoire just loaded right here, and I should be able to
Fantastic.
pull something up here. So Italian Renaissance. Yeah. So here is a piece called, well, I'll play maybe just the first few bars of a piece called Ancor che col partire, which is
Wow.
a madrigal by Cipriano d'Arore. And this is an entabulation for lute. They use this term entabulation to refer to when you take a vocal composition in multiple parts and put the whole thing onto the lute or a keyboard or a harp or some other instrument that was capable of playing music in multiple parts. So this is a madrigal kind of arranged for the lute.
Thank you. Thank you. That is so beautiful. So that leads into my next question. So I've been watching the Netflix series The Medicis, and I've been listening to an audiobook about Renaissance Italy and the Medici family. What a special time in Western European history. And what I wanted to ask you, Lucas, because you've studied in Italy, and we're going to talk a little bit about that later. Renaissance and Baroque music have really strong origins, particularly in northern Italy, Florence, Milano, Toscana, these regions. Why was Italy an important place for the development of Renaissance music? And tell us more about your studies in Italy. I want to know all about it.
Sure. Well, I think the reason why music was, Italy was really at the cutting edge of music has to do with the reasons why Italy was, the Renaissance began in Italy. So it was, first of all, at the heart of the Roman Empire. So, in some cases, especially people that were living in Rome were seeing, all the ruins of ancient Roman buildings every day of their lives. And so when they started to talk about reviving, the ancient learning, they had the evidence of that all around them. it was following the Crusades, where a lot of important classical texts were brought to Italy by Byzantine scholars and other people. Also in Italy, there was a system of city-states, like, Florence and Ferrara and, etc. And they would compete with each other to kind of show off their power and their riches. And they would do that often by hiring the best musicians and the best composers. And due to all of the connections with trade routes, Italy was quite a wealthy country in some places, but also kind of a melting pot of ideas and cultures and the music that came along with them. Some people say of certain parts of Italy, especially like Sicily, ci sono passati tutti, meaning like everybody passed through Italy. So like, the Franks, the Normans, the Turks, so many people kind of had some kind of dealings with Italy. And of course, there was the Vatican, which was a powerful and rich patron of the arts. So it was just like a very exciting artistic scene during the Renaissance. I know you probably don't know this from my name. My last name is Harris, but I'm actually half Italian. So my maternal grandparents immigrated from Calabria, from the south of
Wow.
Italy in the 1930s. And
Okay.
I, of course, grew up not speaking Italian. That like by that time, my mother, they made fun of my mother's accent, so she stopped speaking Italian. So she didn't speak any Italian to me, but she still understands it. And I had to learn Italian, when I went to university, and when I went to Italy to study early music. So I speak it, but I speak it with an accent.
Well, it sounds pretty good to me, and Stefano can probably give the thumbs up on your Italian. Two thumbs up for your Italian. And it's so interesting that your maternal family is from Calabria because the largest population of Italians in Vancouver are Calabrese. Am I right
Ah,
about that, Stefano? We're getting a thumbs up from our audio editor.
my people.
Your people. So that's really cool, and I guess there were some noble families that were also patrons of the arts because they wanted to be, but also because this was showing the other families, hey, look at what Donatello just made for me, or hey, look at what this person just painted for me, or look at the entertainment you're going to hear at my daughter's wedding tonight. So those families
Exactly.
also contributed. Very cool. What sparked your interest in early music?
Um, well, I used to play Baroque and Renaissance music on the classical guitar when I was a teen, and I always loved that repertoire in particular. And eventually, I thought of the idea of, some of the music that I played was lute music. I also made transcriptions of, violin music, cello music, keyboard music. But eventually, I just came upon the idea of trying to play some of these lute pieces on a lute, and I somehow found an old lute at university and started to play then. But I would say there were three things that really kind of cinched the deal for me in early music. One of them was counterpoint. Somehow my brain just completely fell in love with counterpoint. These independent lines that kind of weave around and according to very strict rules, but that create this sensuous, glorious texture. That I don't know, somehow it massages both parts of my brain at the same time. It's both very expressive, but also very, kind of almost mathematical in a way, and it's subject to this very strict, set of rules. The second thing is continuo. Basso Continuo in Baroque music is, I was a really serious jazz guitarist for a couple of years when I was a teenager. And when I learned about continuo, it made immediate sense to me. I thought this is just like comping chords, but a different way of writing it out. So instead of chord
It's
symbols,
true.
I have a bass line with some numbers above it that tell me what chords to play. Of course, the style is completely different, but the idea of the composer writing a shorthand for a chordal instrument just made so much sense to me because it takes so long to write out, exactly what a piano player plays, like when you accompany a song, and then if you even follow that, then you're not as good an accompanist because you're not as responsive and that sort of thing. And then the third thing that really attracted me was improvisation. So because of my jazz background, I loved it that, in early music, you get to play music by really good composers, and yet you get to be a little bit of a co-composer in the sense that, there are some ornaments and cadenzas and continuo realizations and diminutions that need to be added to the piece. Not only can be, but actually should be. And that is really fun, like to think I'm a co-composer, with Josquin des Prés or somebody of that stature. So
Or Monteverdi.
yeah, exactly. Monteverdi's a good one.
Monteverdi's a great one. And that, something just doesn't surprise me that you have a jazz guitar background. And in our concert series, we're moving toward a model of 40% jazz, 60% classical, because jazz music is just amazing. And I'm not surprised that you found the parallel between the two, because you do, as an early musician, there is a lot of freedom within that counterpoint structure. Are you a Wes Montgomery fan?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. Any favorite Wes Montgomery album?
I mostly I just kind of admire him and his kind of innovation, like the way he used octaves and just his kind of melodic sense, and the way his rhythm is just always like right in the pocket. And yeah, yeah, I don't know if I'd pick a favorite album in particular. He's just somebody I kind of think of as one of the greats in the history of plucked instruments.
For sure. And so a lot of the work that we do at Muse West that comes onto this podcast is about music education. And I have to say, I am really curious about the pedagogy of plucked string instruments for Baroque and Renaissance music. What does it look like to teach? Because I'm imagining what happens is, like you mentioned, you're in your late teens, you've played classical guitar, you pick up a lute in your freshman or your sophomore year, you get interested in it. What happens after that? What's the process?
Well, yeah, I mean, now there are some places where you can study the lute, with a great teacher at a university. Like you can go to Bloomington and study the lute with Nigel North, for example, or you can go to Eastman and study the lute with Paul Odette. Um, if you weren't planning to go to one of those places, yeah, it's not easy to find a lute teacher. I mean, the numbers of people that are playing the lute are still like fairly small. There's a certain kind of scene of amateur players. There are not so many professional people like me. That we probably, in all of North America, I bet we have, I don't know, maybe a dozen professional lute players, and they probably have at least a dozen in London, England alone. So those of us that are doing it are usually super busy, and we don't really have that much time to teach, and we certainly don't have time to write method books. There was a wonderful lute pedagogue I'd like to just talk about for a second, if you'll indulge me, Jennifer. Patrick O'Brien, who was a kind of a guru of plucked string instruments and lutes and guitars and harps, and he taught for many, many years out of his New York City studio, and he just devastated the whole community by suddenly passing away in 2014. And the first time I met Pat, I had been playing the lute for about 6 months, and I was still trying to figure out, which end to blow on, that kind of thing. And I met Pat, and he, somebody told him that he had not heard me play yet, but somebody told him, like, you got to hear this kid. I went to a lute song class, and somebody gave me a Baroque cantata, and I was just playing on a little Renaissance lute. And I didn't even really stop to think that was, that was a little bit thin for a Baroque cantata. But at some point I remember it was this chord, this F sharp major chord, and I did a little kind of ornament like that. And somebody told me later, as soon as you hit that chord, everybody in the audience kind of looked at each other and said, "Oh, who's this kid?" And so I was marched to Pat O'Brien immediately. And he said, if you don't know what you're doing after college, you could come to New York and study with me. He said you could get a job at a record store and get yourself a crappy apartment somewhere, in the village, or I don't think you can even get any kind of apartment in the village nowadays. But um,
It's all being gentrified in the village
yeah,
now.
indeed, indeed. But anyway, he sort of gave me this offer, like I could go to New York and get some kind of a day job, and study with him. In the end, I was lucky enough to get this uh, opportunity to go to Italy for a year, and then after Italy, I went to Germany for a year. So I had these 2 years of study in Europe, and then I came back to New York, and then I started to study with Pat off and on whenever I could. And he's really like the closest thing we had to a real lute pedagogue, and he just was he was one of these people who could just talk so beautifully about music. And you'd start to play a French piece, and he would start talking about like a silent film, from the 1930s, and you just be nodding your head going, oh wow, my mind is blown. you know Now I know how to play this piece.
A man of deep knowledge of many sort of areas.
Indeed, indeed, and yeah, just somebody who was just had a lot of charisma and a lot of like kind of personal integrity. Like he was the kind of person that if there was anything, any kind of pretext or anything kind of phony about you, he saw right through it. So yeah, it was like he was. Anyway, I could go on and on about him, but he was a huge influence for me. And unfortunately, he for years and years and years he meant to write a method book for the lute, and guess what? He died before it ever got done. But
Hmm.
he had all kind of files on his computer of kind of pedagogical pieces that he had fingered and so forth. And I have those, and I share those with my students. And I also share all the things that I learned from him, including things about like how to set up your instrument so it's more comfortable for the hand. And also, I used to record all of my lessons on a little mini disc recorder. This is like
Oh
back in
my goodness, I
back
remember
in the 90s.
those.
Yeah. So I have in a box like all of my mini discs with all my lessons with Pat. And at some point, I started to make an effort to, you have to, with mini discs, to make them into a digital file, you actually have to play them out in real time and make them into like go from a digital to analog and then back to digital, and you have to do it in real time. So it takes forever. But anyway, I have that kind of treasure trove of wisdom that I can draw on when I just need to hear his voice, even though honestly, like I just kind of hear his voice in my head when I'm practicing all the time.
It's that kind of teacher who leaves an indelible impression on us forever, I think. A teacher that helps us develop not only as a musician, but like you said, the personal integrity, that piece as well. And becoming a freelance musician requires that in spades. There are so many little and big business and ethical and professional decisions you have to make as a musician that really require you to be set up well as a very self-actualized human being, I think. And we really do see we see a spectrum of that in our industry, and I think you've been around the right people, Lucas.
Well, I feel this deep sense of appreciation listening to you say that. I have to say, when you do make the very personal decision to be a lute player, you are kind of doomed to be a freelancer. You're kind of doomed to enter that world because just the
Absolutely.
instrument is such that there aren't any positions at universities for lutenists nor positions in orchestras. I have about the closest thing that you can get, which is kind of a long-term relationship with Tafelmusik Baroque Orchestra. I'm not a core member, but I'm kind of their regular lutenist. But I take pride in all those things about being a freelancer. I like to produce good work. I don't like to take money from anybody unless I've given them something of value. And as you say, like there are a lot of things that you just have to kind of figure out for yourself, and uh, and kind of forge your own path a little bit. And I do feel certain pride that I've, anyway, so far I've managed to do that. I've certainly made a lot of mistakes. I'm not saying that I'm, have done everything perfectly, but sometimes you don't really have a mentor. You don't really have somebody who pulls you aside and said, here are the things that you need to do. Here are the things that are important. The people you get to know, the relationships you need to cultivate, the skills you need to have. Here's how you file your taxes, and all that kind of stuff. Like, I haven't had a lot of help with a lot of that. So
The
um,
Taxes for Freelance is a series of podcasts,
yes,
each of them an hour long, that
and
I
nobody will
think,
show up.
and nobody will show up, but they might reference them later when it's
Yeah,
April
exactly,
30th at
exactly,
11:50 p.m. Eastern. Oh my
exactly.
goodness, that is so true. So I have some piano students probably listening, ages 8 to 14. If they don't know early music, what should they listen to? Maybe we'll start with choral. What could they start with? One choral piece, one orchestral, and maybe one chamber instrumental ish piece.
Sure. Well, I would say if they're pianist, I mean, I like the idea of introducing somebody to an early music genre that's related to one that they know. So if they're into solo piano music, they should check out solo harpsichord and solo organ music. So, listen to like a toccata by Buxtehude, um, or like an English suite by Bach, or even cooler, like maybe an Italian toccata by Michelangelo Rossi, something like that. Um, in terms of choral music, you can't go wrong with Henry Purcell. It's a great place to start. Also Bach, if you don't know like the B minor Mass and the St. Matthew Passion, um, if if you like religious music, check out Monteverdi and start with the 1610 Vespers. If you like opera, try listening to Handel, maybe Monteverdi. If you like orchestral music, try Rameau. If you like instrumental virtuosity, I'd say listen to some violin sonatas by Heinrich Bieber or Jean-Marie Leclerc, or maybe some cello sonatas by Dall'Abaco. And if you like string quartets, check out music for viola da gamba consort, especially music by William Laws, Royal Consorts. If you're somebody who kind of likes folk music, you might want to check out the Elizabethan Broken Consort repertoire, arrangements by Thomas Morley and other people. There's always a genre that's kind of the early music, counterpart to a modern genre.
It sounds like it. Am I totally mainstream if I still really like the Corelli Christmas Concerto? Am I too mainstream?
Oh, no. I love the Crowley Christmas Concerto.
And you've
Um,
played that on more times than you can count.
well, I hope you don't mind. Like, I'm going to sound like I'm tooting my own horn here, but just before the pandemic, I actually like worked really, really hard and created a whole program around the Crowley Christmas Concerto.
Okay.
Um, I play with a group called the Vesuvius Ensemble that specializes in Southern Italian folk music, and we bring every Christmas a instrumentalist from Southern Italy who is a specialist in the zamponia, which are the Italian Christmas bagpipes, and his name is Tommaso Solazzo. And so Tommaso came over, and we did a program where we did a whole bunch of Baroque music with Tafelmusik, with the Baroque orchestra, pieces that were influenced by the folk music and especially by the bagpipe Christmas tradition. So all the I don't know if you know about this. I'm sure Stefano knows all about this, but um, at Christmas time, the shepherds in southern Italy would come down from the mountains and they would play these bagpipes, and the bagpipes were made by like basically a sheep, like it's the skin of a sheep with kind of kind of a blowhole and a bunch of pipes kind of inserted into it, and they would usually play in pairs, one person playing the zampogna, the other playing this instrument called the charamella, which is like a shawm. And they would go to the different towns and villages and play. And it was really considered to be like the music that was heard when Christ was born. So it was a very, very special repertoire. And they would often play at the churches. And there's this whole tradition of these presepi, these kind of nativity scenes that they would play next to. And so anyway, I made a whole program about that, which was kind of a collaboration between Tafelmusik and the Vesuvius Ensemble. And we did the Crowley Christmas Concerto. And I hope the audience really understood it better at the end of that program, having heard the real thing, the real bagpipes, and then a bunch of other Baroque pieces that were influenced by that sound.
Well, I think you've just suggested our next collaboration with Il Centro here. Because we have a very very large Italian community in Vancouver, and they all kind of congregate around Commercial Drive, and they go to Il Centro, and I think this would be just fabulous for them to have this program. It sounds so cool.
I've been trying to get a gig in Vancouver for the Vesuvius Ensemble, and haven't succeeded yet. So it's great to hear. I didn't actually even really know to what extent there was a big Italian community in Vancouver. So that's really good to know.
There definitely is. Our podcast editor is nodding that there are definitely Italians in Vancouver. And all you have to do is when Italy wins a major soccer game, just go to Commercial Drive. You will meet 80% of the Italians. And did you say, Stefano, 90% of them are Calabrese?
Around 90. No, there's less. There's more other people.
There's people from other regions of Italy. We'll give them some credit.
Okay.
Did you, when you went to Italy, did you kind of find that you were able to connect with that aspect of your heritage?
Well,
Or were you too busy playing the lute?
I think I was too busy playing the lute and trying to, learn Italian, doing like various other things. At some point, I had an Italian sweetheart, so I wanted to spend some time with her too. And actually, I'm going to admit to you now that the year I spent in Italy was up in Milan, so it was up in the northern part of Italy, which is, I think, very different than the south. And I actually, it's terrible to admit this, but I actually have not yet been further south than Rome.
Okay.
Even though, I'm in a group that literally specializes in music from Campania and Puglia, and sometimes we also play music from Abruzzo and Calabria, but a lot of it is really from the region around Naples, and I still haven't been there, and it's driving me crazy. I really must go.
L'anno prossimo.
Sì, ecco.
Wonderful. So Lucas will be in Vancouver later this week. This is too exciting. And we will be having a fantastic concert with Lucas Harris, the principal lute player for Tafelmusik, and Jonathan Adams, baritone. And this concert will be Friday, February 11th at 7:30 p.m. at the Bill Reed Art Gallery. For those who are still hesitant to join public events, the digital concert will be available a week after the performance. For those of you ready to get out of your apartment, we have a handful, and I mean a handful of tickets left. Literally, if you can see me, this many tickets, just 10. So we anticipate those will be gone by Wednesday. Therefore, gather ye rosebuds while ye may, folks. Grab a ticket. Lucas, it has just been a wonderful conversation with you. And I know that many of us on our Muse West team are looking forward to having more conversations with you here in Vancouver about music, early music. And it sounds like maybe we should have an Italian meal while you're here. I know a place.
That would be awesome.
Wonderful. Do you have...
1 minute.
Oh,
We should try recording one question that
okay.
sound too good.
We're going to record one question after we sign off. Now you know this is live, folks. Which makes it more fun. This is real. This is not pre-recorded. This is going to be fun. Okay, so everybody, thank you so much. Grazie tutti. Our podcast editor today is Stefano. He's with us here today in the house, in the casa. Lucas, can you take us out with a little cadence?
Sure. And you know what? There's one little thing I forgot to mention. I mentioned the maker of the small Renaissance lute, Travis Carey, but the baritone lute is made by Wilma Van Berkel, who lives in London, Ontario. So she might be watching, and wanted to
Cool.
make sure she gets some recognition. It's a fantastic lute. So here we go.
Thank you. Well, this has been a very, very special episode of Take Note. My name is Jennifer West, and we will hopefully see all of you at the concert on Friday. Thank you to the Canada Council for the Arts for your support, and to Tom Lee Music for this fancy microphone. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.